You'll still be valuable, Donna, Eric said, flashing that empty sales guy grin he'd been weaponizing since our first pitch deck in 2016. Just more behind the scenes now. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I had just replaced the espresso pod in our god-awful break room Keurig, and the taste of burnt vanilla was still clinging to my tongue when he said it. The room was packed, half Paragon's board, two angel investors Skyping in from God knows where, and Eric standing like a game show host beside a slide titled, Strategic Realignment, Phase 3. I didn't know there'd been a Phase 2. Hell, I didn't even know there was a meeting. That slide should have just said, Operation Erase Donna, but make it look like innovation. We're streamlining our leadership roles, Eric continued, clicking through bullet points like they were facts and not career obituaries, moving toward a flat structure. Titles are a distraction. Effective immediately, Donna will transition from co-founder and partner to director of internal operations. That's when the smirks started. You know that look some men get when they think they're watching a woman finally learn her place? That tusk, we always knew she'd fold expression. I got 6 versions of it from across that glass conference table. Even one of the interns, Chase, who still thought pivot meant turning your laptop, shot me a pity glance. But here's the thing. I didn't fold, I nodded just once. No eye twitch, no lip quiver, not even a raised brow. Because when someone pulls the rug, you don't scream. You check what's under the floorboards, I smiled. Said understood in a tone they'd probably log as acceptance, not the data entry of rage it actually was. Oh, and while we're paused at this delightful betrayal checkpoint, if you're listening and enjoying this tale of corporate treachery, maybe take a second to hit that subscribe button. Like the story, even. It costs nothing and helps the team here survive the algorithm gods. Plus, 90% of y'all are lurkers. Just saying. Anyway, back to the public execution. Eric moved on to the next slide. It was a timeline of deliverables, every milestone listed. Client onboarding systems, cross-channel rollout, the enterprise automation model was built from the frameworks I designed over 8 years. He might as well have used my resume as clip art. Donna will now have more space to focus on documentation, Eric added, like he was doing me a damn favor. Like he hadn't just made me a ghost in the company I co-founded. When the meeting wrapped, people started pretending to look busy. You know, that awkward shuffling where no one wants to make eye contact with the recently demoted? Someone knocked over a water bottle. Chase coughed. Eric clapped me on the back. You're the backbone, Donna. We just need to give you room to support. Support, like a bra or a damn server rack. I walked out of that conference room and straight into the elevator alone. And somewhere between the 5th and 14th floor, the shock calcified into something colder. Not vengeance, not yet, but the quiet realization that Eric had just handed me a very sharp knife and assumed I'd be too polite to use it. I got to my desk, ignored the congrats on the new title, Slack messages, and pulled up our original incorporation documents. The ones Eric never bothered to learn because he was too busy naming himself Chief Vision Officer and shaking hands over steak. 12 clicks later, I found it. Paragon Strategies, LLC. Filed under a holding company I created during our second year for tax flexibility, he said. A dusty little shell no one ever cleaned up. The name on that shell? Mine, stake, 51%. He thought he erased me, but I built the paper trail, and Eric just set it on fire in front of witnesses. The first time I saw the investor deck, it wasn't in a strategy meeting. It was on a monitor in the hallway, looping silently as part of our welcome experience for the client walkthrough. There it was, Paragon Strategies, scalable growth for enterprise systems. And beneath it in italics a quote, we don't just build strategy, we own it. Eric Halston, co-founder. I stood there holding my coffee like it might shatter in my hand. Slide after slide was my work, my diagrams, my segmentation ladders, my cross-platform orchestration map. Except now it was dressed up in Eric's jargon and delivered like it had been channeled from Mount Sinai. The only mention of me? Special thanks to internal support, not even a name. That week my Slack access quietly downgraded. First I lost access to the pitch channel, then the CRM export folder. Finally I got an email from HR. Hi Donna, per the leadership restructure, your bandwidth is best allocated toward documentation efforts. Please prioritize internal process outlines for legacy systems. Let us know if you need clarification. Clarification? Sure, just one question. How do you spell betrayal in corporate? Turns out it's written in the margins of agendas you're no longer invited to. While Eric paraded around with our new enterprise client, some Silicon Valley supply chain leviathan with a penchant for branded water bottles, I stayed behind focusing on documentation. And I did. I documented every single system I ever built. But not for Eric, for myself. I pulled out old source templates, version diagrams, the original white paper we drafted in my apartment back when Paragon was just 2 laptops and a busted Wi-Fi router. I wasn't preserving history, I was building a legal wall. One night, around 2:40 a.m., deep in an insomnia spiral, I reopened the incorporation files again. That Dormant LLC I had found, I dug deeper. It was still active, still legally tied to Paragon's original IP filing, still under my name. Eric never bothered to change it after the series of paperwork. Probably didn't even remember it existed. The thing about men like Eric, they love optics, titles, splashy one-pagers. They don't read the boilerplate. They don't check the ownership logs, but I do. And while he was busy putting my work into decks with animated bullet points and animated GIFs, I was cross-referencing our IP filings with our internal systems index. The framework he was peddling to our $20M client wasn't just inspired by me, it was me. Copyrighted under Paragon's name. And Paragon's ownership still ran through me. Every time he opened his mouth in those pitch meetings, every time he showed off my automation cascade, he wasn't just lying, he was walking into a clause, so I called in sick. Not really, I was very much working. But I needed the optics of distance. Eric thought I was licking my wounds. In reality, I was talking to a lawyer over a signal call, whispering clause numbers into my AirPods while pretending to eat soup. That's when I realized how much Eric had underestimated me. He thought I'd go quietly, fade into some operations corner, building workflows while he rebranded me out of existence. But I didn't fade, I refocused. I stopped thinking like a co-founder and started thinking like a plaintiff. There's a moment when you're buried in a 23-page equity agreement with bloodshot eyes and a half-eaten sleeve of saltines on your keyboard where something clicks. For me, it happened around page 17. Section 4.3b, to be exact. A clause about transfer restrictions that, on its face, looked like standard boilerplate. But buried beneath the legal oatmeal was this quiet line. In the absence of formalized cap table amendments filed with the Secretary of State and acknowledged by all equity stakeholders, initial ownership allocations remain binding unless explicitly voided in writing. That's when I sat up. You see, Eric was always too obsessed with moving fast to actually finish things. He'd sprint through the hard stuff and declare it solved because he said it was solved. But cap tables don't care about charisma, and ours had never been updated. Not officially. The LLC I'd formed in year 2, originally meant as a protective shell during our bootstrapped contracting phase, was still listed as holding 51% of Paragon's strategies. We'd always meant to dissolve it after we incorporated formally. But we never filed the termination. Eric never signed the amendment, because why would he? I was just operations, remember? Turns out his ego wasn't just toxic, it was sloppy. That same week, while Eric was giving a talk at some tech incubator about founder mindset, I was on Zoom with a woman named Kyra, a business attorney who used to sit on the board of one of our early clients. We hadn't spoken in years. I told her everything calmly, clinically. She didn't blink, just said, "How well do you trust your documentation?" I smiled and replied, "Better than I trust people." We started drafting a timeline. Ownership filings, IP contributions, Slack threads showing authorship of the automation model, old pitch decks with my initials in the footer. Then I reached out to Nadine, a former client from our first big win who now ran enterprise rollout at a Fortune 500. I didn't say anything incriminating, just said I was considering a transition and wanted her advice on independent contracting. She gave me 3 leads and offered to write a testimonial. Next, I pinged Devin, our ex-marketing lead who'd left when Eric tried to consolidate her department by replacing her with an AI plugin and a junior copywriter named Zane. Devin still had the old branding assets I designed, complete with metadata pointing back to my laptop. Piece by piece, I wasn't just building a case, I was building a shadow firm. I registered a new LLC, not under Paragon's name, not even under my own directly, something quiet, clean. A consulting firm that mirrored Paragon's offerings just without Eric, the hot air, or the fraud. Within 10 days I had legal counsel, IP documentation, former clients willing to talk, my own infrastructure, and Eric, he was still basking in his one-man show, telling investors that Donna was taking time to recalibrate. Damn right I was. I was recalibrating him right off the ownership map. I wasn't emotional anymore. That phase passed with the HR email and the hallway monitor. What I felt now was colder, sharper, like clicking a seatbelt before a planned collision. Eric thought the game was over, but I had just read the rulebook, and I was holding the pen. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from their corporate office, kind of place with exposed brick, $6 drip coffee, and enough succulents to qualify as a therapy garden. I chose it on purpose, public, professional, and unassuming. Her name was Maya, corporate counsel for our $20 million whale. Smart eyes, polished blazer. Probably could recite indemnity clauses in her sleep. She was already seated when I arrived, reviewing something on her iPad. I approached with a smile and 2 almond croissants, one for her. One for optics, I'm not above bribing a lawyer with carbs. Maya, I said, placing the second croissant on the table like a peace offering. Thanks for making time. I know your calendar's probably triple booked. She smiled, not triple, just stacked, but I was curious. That was the hook. Curiosity, not confrontation. We talked shop at first, industry shifts, vendor nightmares. She asked a few polite questions about Paragon's history. I gave her the sanitized version. Then slowly, I guided the conversation toward our current rollout. Just between us, I said, stirring a sugar packet into my untouched coffee. I noticed the IP documentation in your project brief still lists Eric as sole architect, which surprised me. She didn't flinch, just tapped her iPad and said that's what was submitted in the latest round. Is that inaccurate? I pulled a manila envelope from my bag. Slim, clean, thing dramatic. Inside, a memo, 2 pages, single-spaced, footnotes with timestamps and authorship logs. I wouldn't call it inaccurate, I said, sliding it across. Just incomplete. She opened it, scanned the first paragraph, then flipped directly to the footnotes. I watched her eyes pause at the line, original automation model authored by D. Ellis, December 2017. Confirmed via Git history and metadata. Not looking to start anything, I added lightly. Just wanted you to have the full picture before contracts get finalized. Given your company's sensitivity to IP ownership and all. She read for another minute, then closed the folder, placed it gently on the table and said, that's interesting, not angry, not alarmed, just interested, perfect. Maya wasn't the kind to tip her hand, which was fine. I wasn't there to win her over. I was there to plant her over. We finished the meeting like nothing had happened. She asked for digital copy. I emailed it that afternoon. What she didn't know was that every word in that memo was pre-cleared by my lawyer. Every sentence cross-referenced. No accusations, just facts. Gentle, surgical pressure. Enough to raise a red flag without setting off sirens. And as I walked away, coffee untouched, kwasa still in my hand, I passed a poster for Paragon's upcoming investor webinar. Scaling the Future, it read, with Eric's smirking face front and center. I didn't feel rage or panic or even hope, just quiet certainty, because the thing about landmines, you don't yell before you plant them, you just smile, walk away, and wait. It was called Marketing Deck 6.2 Final, real one this time, classic Eric. I found it in the shared drive under a folder labeled VIP Client Decks. The caps weren't ironic, neither was the audacity. I opened it and scrolled, and what I'd find, but still, something in me clenched when I saw it laid out like that. Slide 2, the Paragon methodology. Slide 3, Adaptive Integration Framework. Slide 6, Donna's 4 quadrants of scalable growth, except, of course, it didn't say Donna's. He'd renamed it the Halston Matrix. That one actually made me laugh, out loud, alone in my apartment at 11:43 p.m. while eating microwaved lentils. The Halston Matrix. Jesus Christ. Every framework, every phrase, every diagram down to the rounded corners was mine. My work. Lifted whole from the internal documents I'd written over the last 8 years, now red-idled, repackaged, and wrapped in corporate sleaze. But here's the thing, I didn't freak out. I didn't throw my laptop. Instead, I opened a blank deck. I called it Comparative IP Analysis V1.0. It started with 2 simple side-by-side slides, one with Eric's Halston Matrix and the other with my original framework pulled from a 2019 onboarding guide. Then I layered in metadata. Document creation timestamps, author IDs, Git history, Slack messages, version control diffs. By the time I was done, it was 62 slides of timestamp receipts, and every single one bore my digital fingerprint. I didn't send it. God, no, that would have been noise. Instead, I logged into a private legal vault. One Kyra had set up for me, encrypted, time-sealed, immutable. I uploaded the entire deck with a note. In the event of contract dispute, refer to IP ledger hash DKE 442B. Then I shut my laptop and sat still in the silence. Not smug, not proud. Just ready. I knew what was coming. The client was circling final approval. Eric was planning his investor call like it was the Super Bowl. He'd even hired a video team. There were rumors of a champagne toast, a client walkthrough, some staged footage of team collaboration featuring the junior staff Eric liked to call the brain trust. I wasn't invited to any of it, but I didn't need to be, because while Eric played peacock in front of the ring light, I'd built the trap beneath the stage, and the rope was already looped. He just hadn't felt it tighten yet. The prep call was scheduled for 4:00 p.m. sharp, an investor-client alignment session, supposedly to showcase strategic unity ahead of the contract signing. Translation: Eric wanted a stage to gloat before the ink dried. I knew what this was going to be. One more chance for him to posture while I was paraded as a loyal relic of the past. A smile, a nod, and maybe, a single question thrown my way if it related to something dull like onboarding workflows. I joined the Zoom 2 minutes early. My camera off, my mic muted. I listened. Eric was already holding court, and that's why Paragon is uniquely positioned. This isn't just about systems, it's about vision. We don't just solve problems, we preempt them. There was polite laughter, some nodding faces in the Brady Bunch grid, a few blinking camera lights, then he saw me pop in. Ah, Donna, he said with mock cheer. Glad you could join. Everyone, this is Donna Ellis, our internal operations lead and, well, the glue that holds it all together. Literally, she documents everything. I unmuted. Hi, everyone. My voice didn't shake. The call went on. Eric clicked through my slides, and sold my frameworks like they were his birthright. He even threw in some of my metaphors, chopped and bastardized beyond recognition. At one point, he described our automation pipeline as kind of like a Netflix recommendation engine for logistics. I made a note. That line might be useful later in court, and then it happened. A junior investor asked me directly, Donna, how do you see this model evolving over time? Before I could answer, Eric laughed. Oh, Donna doesn't do future forecasting. She's more back-end. Process. You know, receipts and runbooks. Let's not act like we're partners or anything. He said it with a wink, a wink. Everyone laughed. It was the kind of laughter that says, we're not laughing with you, we're laughing because we don't want to be the one not laughing. I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. You're right, I said, my voice steady, my camera still off. We're not partners. Then I clicked leave meeting. No dramatic speech, no final words, just the truth, clean and sharp. Within the hour, I logged into the Secretary of State's filing system and submitted a formal trigger on the Dormant LLC's control clause. The one Eric never amended. The one that, due to his negligence and my long memory, still gave me majority voting rights over Paragon's IP. I attached the clause documentation, referenced the timestamped ownership logs, and included the advisory opinion Kyra had quietly secured from an outside counsel 3 weeks prior. Then I sent a brief, professional email to Maya, the client's lawyer. Per our prior discussion, please see attached update regarding ownership clarification relevant to deliverables under review. Feel free to loop in your internal counsel. Happy to provide further details as needed. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and turned on some Billie Holiday. Eric thought he'd buried me under a new title. He didn't realize I'd buried a clause under his entire empire, and it had just come due. Eric was dressed for war, at least his version of it. Blue blazer, unbuttoned collar, ring light set to visionary glow. His hair was shellacked back with the kind of product that promises confidence and delivers hubris. It was 10:57 a.m. on Friday. The investor victory call, as he'd named it in the calendar invite, was set to begin at 11 sharp. I wasn't invited, of course, but that didn't matter. I knew the schedule. The client team was dialing in from San Francisco. The investors were logging in from New York, Chicago, Singapore. Eric had even commissioned a branded background, Paragon's logo floating over an animated cityscape. It looped behind him like a green screen made of arrogance. This wasn't just a contract signing. This was his coronation. He opened the call with a welcome speech, hands gesturing like a man unveiling a statue of himself. Today marks not just a milestone, but a moment. A legacy moment, he said. Behind him, someone popped a bottle of champagne too early. A junior staffer off camera whispered, wait for the signature. Laughter. Applause. Eric laughed too, but his eyes stayed glued to the screen. He knew what was coming. The moment where he'd sign his name on the dotted line and cement himself as the architect of a $20 million rollout. The client's GC, Maya, appeared on screen, her face unreadable, voice clipped. We'll move to signatures shortly. Just awaiting one final internal confirmation. Eric nodded, smug, of course, take your time. Great things are worth waiting for. What he didn't know was that 3 blocks away, Maya's phone was ringing. And I was on the other end. Donna Ellis, I said when she answered. No small talk, no quasas this time. You should check the vault link I sent last night, refresh your inbox. Time-sealed cap table update filed and time-stamped. The clause is active, there was a pause, I could hear her clicking. Then the silence turned dense, like the moment before lightning hits. Are you triggering majority control, she asked. It's already triggered, I replied. The clause went active at midnight. And for legal purposes, I've assumed management of the deliverables under a new entity. Jesus, it wasn't fear, it was awe. You'll find comparative IP in the folder as well, I added. Documented, attributed, signed. Everything he's about to present, he doesn't own the rights to execute. Maya said nothing for a moment. Then, understood, we hung up. Meanwhile, back in Zoomland, Eric was mid-monologue. We've always believed in client centricity, he was saying. That's why this partnership will redefine strategic deployment for Meyer unmuted. Eric, she said calmly. Before you proceed, there's been a material development. His smile faltered just for a beat. I've just received clarification regarding the ownership of the methodologies and IP referenced in this contract, she continued. We'll need to pause for legal review before any signatures proceed. The air changed. No one laughed. Eric blinked. I'm sorry, what clarification? Maya didn't answer him directly. She just said, my client just spoke to your ex-partner. And that's when the detonation began. The screen went quiet. Investor faces froze, not from lag, but from shock. Someone whispered, is this a joke? Another voice said, what partner? Eric tried to speak, but all that came out was static. His voice cracked like an adolescent boy's, and behind the silence, the clock ticked. He never saw it coming, but I did because I'd timed it down to the second. The pen was in Eric's hand. Blue ink. The fancy kind he liked to pull out for legacy contracts, as if the right pen could make him a founder again instead of a fraud in a blazer. The contract sat before him on the table, 2 inches thick, corners crisp, bearing the client's logo in embossed silver. He glanced at the screen, mugged a little for the camera, eyes squinting like he was born to be on CNBC, and said, all right, let's make history. And then Maya, composed, unreadable, lethal, held up one hand. Before you sign, she said, voice level, my client just spoke to your ex-partner. The room went still, like a shotgun had gone off underwater. Eric froze mid-laugh. Sorry, what? Maya didn't blink. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a packet, thick, tabbed. The top page had a timestamp. The second bore the state seal. The third was the ownership ledger. She slid it forward. This, she said, is an official filing update from the Secretary of State's office, timestamped 12:01 a.m. today. It confirms a reactivation and trigger of Clause 6.4 under your original LLC operating agreement. Eric stared like he was trying to read hieroglyphics with a concussion. Clause 6.4 Maya continued, specifies that any agreement involving licensed use of Paragon's proprietary systems or deliverables must receive authorization from the majority stakeholder of record. That stakeholder, she tapped the packet, is Miss Donna Ellis. He blinked. Twice. That clause was dormant. That entity was rolled into the new structure during it was never closed, Maya said. Your filings never dissolved the original operating entity, nor did they amend the majority signature requirement. Which means, legally, you do not have the authority to enter into this contract on behalf of Paragon's deliverables. He tried to laugh it off. This is absurd. We've been operating under the new cap table since the Series A. No updated cap table was submitted to the state, she said flatly. No dissolution documents, no formal amendment, and no majority signature from Miss Ellis. An investor on the call, one of the New York guys with a pinstripe shirt and the cold, dead eyes of someone who's tanked better startups than Eric could dream of, leaned forward and said, "Is this exposure going to be public?" Maya nodded once. "It already is." Eric's face drained. You could practically see the espresso leave his bloodstream. "Donna doesn't have the infrastructure," he blurted, voice rising. She's internal. She doesn't execute. I built these decks. I made the pitch." "No," Maya said calmly. "You presented someone else's work without consent, using an invalid cap table and a suspended authorization chain. This isn't a partnership breach. It's a deliverables breach." He turned to his assistant, off camera. "Where's the comms team? Get legal on the line now." But it was too late. One investor muted his mic and turned off his camera without a word. Another stood up and left frame entirely. Eric looked back at Maya. "You're telling me this deal's off because Donna Ellis filed a form?" She looked at him and said, "I'm telling you the deal never belonged to you in the first place." He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. The doors to the conference room opened exactly 17 minutes after Maya dropped the packet. Not a second too soon, not a second too late. Eric was still frozen at the head of the table, pen in hand like someone had taken a photo and forgot to unpause it. He hadn't signed. Couldn't sign? Not anymore. I walked in. No blazer. No statement jewelry. Just a black dress, low heels, and the quiet kind of confidence that doesn't need volume to take up space. Every head turned. A few jaws, too. One investor mouthed, "Is that Donna?" Maya stood and gestured toward me like she'd been expecting this entrance all morning, which, of course, she had. "I'd like to introduce Donna Ellis," she said. "She'll be co-leading the rollout via D. Ellis Strategy Group, our updated contract vehicle. Ownership verified. IP transfer documented. Execution rights intact." There was a beat of silence long enough to hear the tension crack like a plastic fork. Eric finally moved. "What the hell is this?" Maya replied before I had to. "This is a restructuring of engagement, at the client's request. But I built this deal." I turned to him. First time we'd locked eyes in weeks. He looked smaller somehow, like someone had deflated the fantasy he built out of mirrors and slide decks. "You built it on my blueprints," I said, calm, no bite, just truth. One of the investors, Singapore, I think, spoke for the first time. "Will this affect timeline or deliverables?" Maya shook her head. "Everything is intact. The leadership shift secures compliance and strengthens execution continuity." They nodded, just like that. No objections, no hesitation. Not one person stood to defend him. They weren't partners with Eric. They were partners with the result. "Donna," Maya said, "the floor is yours." I stepped forward and opened a fresh copy of the contract. Not Paragon's version, not Eric's, mine. Branded with the logo of the new LLC. Filed 3 weeks ago. Fully owned, fully operational, fully mine. As I placed it on the table, Eric tried one last time. "This is a mistake. You don't have the resources. You don't have the bandwidth to handle this." I didn't look at him when I replied. I looked at Maya. "We'll begin with the staggered integration model. Client retains internal discretion on back-end phases, and our deliverables will map to the revised implementation timeline, effective immediately. Professional, precise, lethal." Eric stood there, stunned, still holding the pen like it might change the reality around him if he just pressed harder. I walked past him. Not fast, not slow, just steady. And as I passed, I leaned in. Close enough that only he could hear. "You were right," I whispered. "We weren't partners." Then I left him there, pen in midair, legacy in shambles, ego bleeding out in real time. The cameras didn't follow me. No applause, no music swell. Just the quiet echo of a door closing. And behind it, a man who finally realized silence was never surrender. It was strategy. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.